Prabhupada. Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Paribrajagacharya Sotara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananti Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Jagau Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dhamma Ki Jai. Navadvip Dhamma Ki Jai. Shri Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Madhurya Dham Ki Jai. Mathura Dhamma Ki Jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Puri Dhamma Ki Jai. Shama Veda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaivam narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayat nastapareshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shlokir bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, 8th chapter, 7th verse? Yeah. Yadadatu mato brahman.
Number 6, man.
Oh, 6. Okay, sorry. Dotatma Purusha Krishna. Paramulam namujjate. Mukta sarva pariklesha. Panta sva sharanam yata. Dotatma Purusha Krishna. Paramulam namuchante. Mukta sarva pradikshesha. Pantaksva sharanam yata. Dota atma, whose heart has been cleansed. Purusha, the living being. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Paramulam, the shelter of the lotus feet. Na, never. Munchati, gives up. Mukta, liberation. Liberated. Sarva, all. Pariklesha, of all miseries of life. Pantaha, the traveler. Svasharanam, in his own abode. Yata, as it were. Translation: a pure devotee of the Lord, whose heart has once been cleansed by the purpose of devotional service, by the process of devotional service, never relinquishes the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna, for they fully satisfy him, as a traveler is satisfied at home after a troubled journey. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One who is not a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord Krishna is not completely cleansed in the heart. But a perfectly cleansed person never quits the devotional service of the Lord. In discharging such devotional service, as ordered by Brahmaji to Narada, in the preaching of Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes a representative of the Lord engaged in preaching work meets various so-called difficulties. This was exhibited by Lord Nityananda when he delivered the two fallen souls, Jagai and Madai. And similarly, Lord Jesus Christ was crucified by the non-believers. But such difficulties are very gladly suffered by the devotees in preaching, because in such activities, although apparently very severe, the devotees of the Lord feel transcendental pleasure because the Lord is satisfied. Prahlad Maharaj suffered greatly, but still he never forgot the lotus feet of the Lord. This is because a pure devotee of the Lord is so purified in his heart that he cannot leave the shelter of the Lord in any circumstances. There is no self-interest in such service. The progress of culturing knowledge by the Gyanis, or the bodily gymnastics of the yogis are ultimately given up by the higher respective performers. But a devotee of the Lord cannot give up the service of the Lord, for he is ordered by his spiritual master. Pure devotees like Narada and Nityananda Prabhu take up the order of the spiritual master as the sustenance of life. They do not mind what becomes of the future of their lives. They take the matter very seriously, as the order comes from higher authority, from the representative of the Lord, or from the Lord himself. The example set herein is very appropriate. A traveler leaves home to search for wealth in far distant places, sometimes in the forest, and sometimes on the ocean, and sometimes on hilltops. Certainly, there are many troubles for the traveler when he is in such unknown places. But all such troubles are at once mitigated as soon as the sense of his family affection is remembered, and as soon as he returns home, he forgets all such troubles on the way. A pure devotee of the Lord is exactly in a family tie with the Lord, and therefore he is undeterred in discharging his duty in a full, affectionate tie with the Lord. Verse again, text 6, a pure devotee of the Lord whose heart has once been cleansed by the process of devotional service never relinquishes the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna, for they fully satisfy him, as a traveler is satisfied at home after a troubled journey. Mukam karoti vachalam bangum lengayate girim yatkaripataraham bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. Prabhupada writes in the purport, the example is set herein is very appropriate. A traveler leaves home to search for wealth in far distant places, sometimes in the forest and sometimes on the ocean and sometimes on hilltops. Some of you may remember the gold rush that took place in the United States and California in about the mid-1800s. Some people came from very far away. Some risked their lives, some died in the process of finding gold, and some were successful, but most were unsuccessful. This, therefore, is a very good example. And when one comes home, he forgets all these difficulties. There was a group of people, Parthasarthi knows about this, called gum diggers. They came from former Yugoslavia to New Zealand on boats in about 1850, 1860, thereabouts. And they liked the sap from the kauri trees so much that they took it back to Yugoslavia, and it was used in paints and cosmetics and very, very extremely wonderful fragrance or aroma. And they risked their lives for it, and some died in the treetops, according to legends anyway. But they risked their lives to go on these great journeys. But when they returned home to former Yugoslavia, they felt very satisfied and very comfortable. This was because they returned home. But some stayed in New Zealand and became quarrymen or something like this. The rocks, they dug out the rocks and they became sort of well known for that. So that it's an extremely important example about home. Sometimes we think of home as, well, there's a saying, home sweet home. But in the internet, sometimes there's a picture of a house. There's another saying that a house is not a home. But there's something called the home page. So the word home has been used and abused many times in many ways. It's said to be the very first word that an infant utters, because when he or she closes his mouth after finding their vocal words o or ah, they say home, or sometimes people think it's om, but it's it's considered very important first word that is ever said by a human being. And then Prabhupada used that word very instructively in his Back to Godhead magazine. On many occasions he talked about back to home, back to Godhead. In other words, that's the real home of the living entity, is to have that family tie, affection, as the Prabhupada calls it, with Krishna. That's the real home. And that's the only place of final satisfaction. Not long ago, no, it was long ago. It was about 15 or 20 years ago. I was entering the United States through Hawaii, and the customs agent noticed in my passport that there were a lot of stamps. I'd been to a lot of different countries. And I was just like a lot of travelers trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. But anyway, he asked me a question. He said, "Where is home?" And I didn't think about it very much. I just wanted to leave. And I kind of muttered Oregon, because that's where I was born, in Portland, Oregon. And then later on, I began to think, well, it wasn't such a good answer, really. I wasn't very philosophical. It wasn't very good preaching. I should have said something like Krishna Loka or the spiritual sky or something like that, something more philosophical. But I just kind of, it was kind of a good question, actually. But anyway, in hindsight, I think I gave the wrong answer. So the people are after, they're traveling around the world, as is mentioned in the purport. They're looking for wealth. And some people looked for orchids, and they brought them back, and they were considered very valuable. Of course, now it's all done with technology. There's grafting and things like that. You can make any kind of orchid you want. But there were people that were looking for gold. And there was a statement in the Ramayana somewhere, Prabhupada mentioned that Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, the island that's just off of India, was built of gold by Ravana, and that he had a brother who was living in Brazil, and that his brother was able to build an underground, like a subway or a tunnel under the ocean, all the way from Brazil to Ceylon, which is intercontinental, and it's something that even scientists today can't do. I mean, they did build a tunnel between the England and France, but it was kind of short compared to this one that Ravana's brother built. And so the whole, according to what the Ramayana said, or what Prabhupada said in the lecture, I think it was in 1973 or thereabouts, or 74, 75, that the golden city of Lanka was built from gold that was transported underground from Ravana's brother from Brazil. And later on, Prabhupada said that he was aware that gold was very prominent in that particular country. And he asked the devotees when he was lecturing, I think it was it was 29th of January 1973. I printed out this little thing. He said, "There's too much gold stock there, and every nation is hankering how to take it. That will be the effect. What is the struggle in this world? Struggle is the gold is there. The gold mine is there, and everyone trying to exploit it. Quote, how can I take, or my nation can take? Nationality means expanded selfishness." So I watched a documentary, True Confessions. It was before I was a devotee. It was called The Gold Fever. And it was all about people that were trying to get gold out of Brazil. And it showed people walking up these human-made steps made of mud, and they were carrying these kind of like walk-like things on their foreheads full of mud, and there were little specks of gold in it. And when they got to the top, they lived in these kind of like ramshackle buildings full of prostitutes with dollar bills or $100 bills or cruceros on their breasts and all kinds of things. And so they were involved in a lot of illicit activity. So gold is kind of a symbol of illicit activity. And that's what Ravana was doing. Ravana was building a whole empire out of gold. That's gold fever. And as Prabhupada says in people are struggling to get this gold. And in one portion of the video, they showed a number of rafts on the Amazon. And the water was flowing very swiftly. There were about 4 rafts side by side. And it was told that divers in diving helmets would go down to the base of the Amazon from these rafts to find gold. And there was a very fierce kind of competition. I don't know if they were from different countries or different companies, but they were competing with each other to get as much gold as possible out of the Amazon River in Brazil. And at some point, according to the documentary, competing raft owners would snip the air hoses down to the diving bell owners or divers, and they would drown. That's how competitive it was. They were trying to get gold, the most gold, for their rafts. And if there was somebody competing in a neighboring raft, they would cut their air supply out. So the competition was very vicious. It's still pretty vicious. So people are hankering after gold all the time. There's a saying, I don't know if it's in this country, but it was in different countries, that good as gold. Have you ever heard that? Good as gold? I heard it when I first left the United States, and I was domiciled in some other countries. But that's gold fever. And people are almost insanely after this gold. And what the verse says is that when we reach our final destination, which is Krishna Loka, we don't hanker after wealth. We feel very satisfied, even if we find a lot of difficulties. And he gives the example of Christ, that he was preaching God consciousness and what was his fault, and we're going to experiencing Christmas in about a week, I guess, in this country. But when he was crucified, according to what Prabhupada said, he didn't feel anything was going wrong. Crucified by the non-believers. I think the history is that Pontius Pilate ordered him to be punished, along with some other people that were sort of breaking the colonial laws. And there was a group called the Sanhedrin. They were a group of Jewish elders. And this, according to the historical record, Pontius Pilate consulted with them to find out if he should actually punish this man who says he's the Son of God. And because they were Jewish, they opposed Jesus Christ, and they advised Pontius Pilate to go ahead and punish him. So they were crucified, and it was very brutal. I mean, what punishment in those days was extremely brutal. I mean, we think the electric chair is bad. I mean, it's pretty bad, and gas chamber is pretty bad. But they would put people, they would nail their hands to a cross and stick spears into their sides or into their stomachs or whatever. It was very brutal, and make them carry a cross. According to the historical record, Christ was made to carry a very heavy cross all the way up to the mountaintop where he was crucified. And this crucifixion was displayed in front of many people who were spectators to show them that if they misbehaved, they would be impaled or crucified similarly. Anyway, that's a bit of the history. And but we live in a Christian country, so I'm giving a little history, a little background, because it's a Christian country, just like the North America and most of Europe, France and England. They're Christian countries. In fact, when I used to fill out the landing cards in England, it would say Christian name. That was the first name, and then it would have surname. But it was always Christian name, like Mike or John or Denise or whatever. So that's not our real home. The spiritual world is our real home. But it's kind of a gross example. It's told that when a traveler comes back home, he feels relaxed, he's reposed, he knows where everything is, he's familiar with the house and the people in it, and he can relax, he or she. And according to the verse that I'll read again, a pure devotee whose heart has once been cleansed by the process of devotional service, he never relinquishes the lotus feet of the Lord, for they fully satisfy him, as a traveler is satisfied at home after a troubled journey. So it's more than just satisfaction. It's almost there's a saying that to be successful in business, one has to satisfy the customer. But in a more sophisticated way, one has to delight the customer. One has to make the customer feel very happy and very ecstatic, according to material points. But the real happiness or contentedness is in the spiritual world, where when one becomes Krishna, there's no more hankering, no more lamenting, no more desiring for gold or wealth or orchids or whatever they are. But one is completely satisfied that I don't have to do anything else. Even if I'm tortured, it's all part of living in the material world, living in Kali Yuga. I'm not going to be happy in this realm somehow or other. So that's the spiritual world, and I wish I had said that when I was passing through the customs. It's preaching to say that our real home is in the spiritual world, not in a place like Oregon or California or some other material place like Johannesburg but it's in the spiritual sky. So a pure devotee, that's all they think about. And we read about such devotees in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and other places that they have no desire to have anything material. There was a devotee named Kolavecha Sridhar who made a living by selling plantain leaves or banana leaves or banana cups. He would string them together, and he had a very, very small income. And his very small income was such that he gave half of it to the process of devotional service. And when Lord Chaitanya offered him that he should at least get a proper house to live in, he said that, well, I don't really need a house. I know my roof is leaking, but the birds are doing okay. They're living under the trees. They're getting watered whenever it rains, and I don't need anything. So a pure devotee doesn't want anything material, even a better house to live in, no matter what it is, or great wealth. And a similar thing happened with Sudama Brahman when Lord Chaitanya offered him all kinds of wealth. He was an old schoolmate, I think, of Krishna's, and he was living in a poverty-stricken condition. And Lord Chaitanya offered him, or Krishna offered him, everything, wealth, a beautiful wife, a beautiful home, a beautiful palace. And he said, what's the point? I don't need anything. And then, consequently, Lord Krishna built him manifested a very beautiful palace for him to live in, a very beautiful wife and very nice clothes to have. And so he didn't, during the process of not wanting anything, sometimes Krishna gives everything, even material, even though we don't want any material desire, any material benefits. Krishna is all, and he offered the same thing to Prahlad Maharaj. What would you desire? Because Hiranyakashipu, his father, was very cruel to him. He tried to murder him. He tried to throw him into a pit of snakes. Tried to throw him off a cliff. And every time, and Srila Prabhupada was very attracted to Prahlad Maharaj. In fact, when in his private reveries, he used to chant the seventh canto verses that Prahlad Maharaj was chanting in Sanskrit, to say that he didn't need anything, he didn't want anything but the service of the Lord. He learned all this from Narada Muni, and Prabhupada describes him as our Nitya Siddha friend, that he's not an ordinary person, he's a Nitya Siddha, eternally liberated devotee. So he wasn't just an ordinary person, Prahlad Maharaj. And all those who want material wealth, they suffer. And there's another instance where Prabhupada approached a group of Brahmins who were very, very assiduously practicing their very detailed rituals of observing things properly and following all the rituals very exactly and saying pronouncing all the Sanskrit words correctly and producing fire and so on. But when Krishna approached them to deviate, to give them some of their offerings, which hadn't been offered yet, they refused. And their reasoning was that, well, we haven't done the jagya yet. We haven't completed the jagya. We haven't made an offering of the food. Therefore, you can't have any. And wives who had more devotion decided to give the unoffered food to Krishna. Krishna was very happy. So there are instances in which sometimes people who are not attached to material things, or whether they're Brahmins or whatever they are able to transcend and to be happy. After Krishna chastised the Kaliya snake demon, it was his wives who said that actually he was very fortunate, because in the manner of rebuking him, Krishna danced on his hoods with his feet. And the women said that it was a very, very great blessing for Kaliya to have the lotus feet of Krishna on his head. A great blessing to do that. So, to make a long story short, one who has no material hankerings, who only hankers for the spiritual world, is always very dear to Krishna. Krishna is dear to them, and they are dear to Krishna. So I'll stop there if there are any questions or anything that you want to add. Anyone wants to add? Anything at all?
I can make a little comment.
Hang on.
Okay. It just came to mind when you were telling me the story when you got asked where your home was. When they lived in India for so many years, they always ask me, where are you from, where are you from? They all wanted to know where you're from. So I used to say, where am I going, where am I going? And try to make it more of a transcendental situation instead of saying, well, I'm from Australia.
Well, that shows you're realized.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Anyone else have anything to say? You can just stop there. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.